Hello, and welcome to Board Stupid, with a podcast that loves talking tabletop games, D&D, and other awesome stuff. I'm Tom.
And I'm Simon.
We're just a couple of nerds talking about the things that we love and are worth geeking out over. So, Mr. Simon, if you're ready, dive into this week's episode.
Let's do it.
This week, we're talking about our annual, if somewhat belated, Board Stupid top 10 games of all time, or perhaps 2024 and a half.
Yeah, we'll see the schedule here. Some people do it every 6 months, so I think May isn't too bad at time of recording.
Yes, well, except for the fact that we're 18 months behind.
No, we're doing it. Come on.
It's fine. We're still doing a top 10, and to a certain degree, I suppose this is probably based on some of the testing that we did back at the beginning of the year, but we can also add some surprise entries, I'm sure.
Yeah, the thing is, these lists are constant change anyway. I think we've both played stuff since we first made our list that may well creep in if we were to redo the list now. So I think it's fine to have a bit of variance and a bit of time delay as we feel we need to.
So this isn't really just the top 23 up until the beginning of 2024. It's also including as much of 2024 as we can fit as well.
Yeah.
So Simon and I will be running down our personal top 10s of all time, talking about a few long-standing favourites, probably some newcomers, and perhaps even some surprise entries for 2024.
Yeah, my list is not wildly different to last year's. Last year's, however, it felt like lots and lots of new entries. So I think I've got a different mixture this time.
Do you think that that's possibly that you're settling into a certain niche with the types of games that you like?
Definitely, yeah. I found the stuff that I really like, and I've not gone crazy on buying a whole bunch of new stuff recently either. So I think that's played into it.
I always find it interesting because I always think of myself as someone who really, really likes
super heavy
Euros or quite crunchy Euros and sort of heavy worker placement games, things that are very sort of strategic. And then I look at my top 10 and there's actually quite a few in there that are not that.
Yeah. Do you think there's a reason for that? Because I think I've got an inkling.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a niche. I have an allowance for random bullshit in my games, but I think the games that I like that are outside the Eurosphere tend to be games that have a narrative to them.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, big games that might have either a story to them or a sort of an emergent narrative to the way that they play. That means that the focus of the game is not on the randomness of the mechanics that might otherwise frustrate me outside of Euro games.
Sure. Yeah, I think because of I don't know, again, you might have different criteria to me, but we use the PubMe4 ranking engine, which presents these two different options of games out of the list that you've input of candidates. And the criteria of judgment then is up to you as to which you like. And I think maybe like me up to a point, you can appreciate those crunchier, heavy Euro games, but they're not necessarily your top 10 in terms. Because for me, a lot of it is just pure, which of these two would I like to play most? Which is the most fun for me at this point?
That's the trick, isn't it? It's so subjective. If you've not tried PubMeeple before, do take the challenge. Have a look at the PubMeeple website. They've got integration with BGG. So you've got your collection saved. It's as easy as feeding your collection, your username, if you like, your collection into PubMeeple. And it will also allow you to exclude things. It will allow you to exclude expansions to minimize the number of repeats, or you can choose to exclude certain games or manually add more of them. And I would probably strongly suggest that you don't necessarily include every game you've ever played because it can get very, very long.
Yeah, doing a bit of pre-editing will save your sanity because it will want you to compare every possible combination of games, I think.
But ultimately, it gives you a head-to-head sort of format where it'll just show you the box arts of two games with no real question. It's just, which of these would you prefer?
Pandemic, Sagrada, pick one.
Yeah, and there's no specific criteria given. It's entirely up to you. And often it's quite a surprise because you'll have something pop up like a combination of two games that maybe you didn't expect that are perhaps in totally different spheres.
Well, it kills me sometimes, the comparisons it gives you, like The Mind and Scythe. And how on earth am I supposed to pick one? So it's just...
Well, that's a big part of this top 10, right? It's thinking about the criteria that you feel are most important when you take the test. I always think it's quite interesting because often I get about halfway through the test and then I decide I might want to change my criteria.
Yeah, I've
I
had
have
that
definitely
feeling.
started again more than once.
I've run this list twice and kind of amalgamated the two top tens, which were largely the same in both
Yeah.
runs. So I felt pretty solid in my choices at the moment.
I definitely feel the same. I probably get maybe half of the games are the same if I was to run it twice. But
Yep.
the one, maybe the bottom or the 6 to 10 out of the top 10 might change, or they might at least change order, and you'll have a couple of new ones suddenly sneak in, and you'll
Yeah.
think, actually, I probably did. I thought I did the same comparison, but suddenly I've got different options in there.
Yeah, my 11 to 20 is kind of a floating pool of, oh, these might enter the top 10 depending on what I
It
happen
does.
to choose.
It
at the
does
time.
get very interesting when you start looking outside of the top 10, and it doesn't just show your top 10. The PubMeeple ranking will give you a nice little sort of image of your top. I think it's like your top 9 for some reason,
Okay.
just because it panels together nicely for the picture.
Yeah, I suppose so.
But after that, it still gives you a big list, and actually, it'll rank everything in order. I mean, it will probably become nonsense after the top 20 or 30, but the top 20 can be really interesting to have a look at because there's often things in there that you might not have expected.
Yeah, I've definitely had a couple of surprises in there, I think.
Okay, so, as with previous years, we realise this is very subjective. Hopefully, we will strike a chord with some of the listeners, and there'll be something here for everyone. It might be something that you've been thinking about picking up, something that you may have played once or twice. You might have a different opinion of how it went, but at the end of the day, we play games here that we find really interesting, and probably everything that's in this top 10, top 20, whatever it's going to be, games that we really love. And there's a narrow degree of differentiation between a lot of these titles. It can be very, very difficult to pick one over the other. And often you'd be quite happy to play any of these games.
Absolutely. The honest truth is none of these are really in our hearts better than the others. You just got to put one in front of the other at some point.
Sure. Your mood may change from day to day. Who knows?
Yeah, for sure.
Here's one quick thing before we start. Did you keep this to your collection only, or have you added in anyone else's games, any others to the collection?
Looking at my top 10 at the moment, there were 3 that I didn't own at the time.
There you go.
There's now only 2 that I don't own because I've bought one since.
Well, I've added in a couple to the hat, but it's easy to get caught up and overdo the number of games that you put in here. If you put in 60 games, you might be sitting there for 45 minutes just picking one against the other.
Even just in the Bored Stupid family, between you, Wayne, and Matt, there's going to be 200 other games that I don't own. And I think, and this might sound weird, but I think a degree of the criteria, consciously or otherwise, is, well, I bought this game. It's kind of going to sit more in my upper echelons than ones I haven't bought because there's a reason I bought these ones.
Yeah, I do find it interesting when we're doing the ranking. Sometimes I'll see a head-to-head pop up and I'll feel compelled to answer that I prefer one game over the other because I know it's taking up a load of space on my shelf and I haven't played it for a while. I feel bad almost for not playing it.
Yeah, time since played is definitely a factor as well. There's some that I think I would rank higher if I'd played them more recently. But again, that has to be a valid criteria. There's a reason you've not got around to playing it. Perhaps it's not in your collection and it's further afield than your
difficult
access
to get to the table, or you don't have the right group, or you don't have enough people. We've got too many people. So why don't we go straight into it? Simon, you can go first. You want to go in any particular order? You want to go from 10 up?
Oh yeah, you got it. 10. There's a countdown from 10
So
to
we'll
1.
count down. If we have overlaps, we can, obviously we can dive in and talk about them at the time. And maybe at the end we can always pop in some honourable mentions. I'm sure there'll be some in the 11 to 20 range that'll be interesting to talk about as well.
For sure, absolutely.
So, Simon, you're number 10.
Is Gigawatts.
Ooh, okay. I've still only got to play this once. I want to play it again.
Oh, mate, we should crack it out after we've recorded then. I'm going to say that about every game.
Yeah.
Gigawatt, for those who don't know, is a lesser-known title. It came out Field 22, so a year and a bit
Just
old.
after, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think you could pick up from there if you back the Kickstarter, which I did. This is effectively an economy game. Some comparison could be made to Smartphone Inc. You're working in the energy industry.
Yeah.
So you are one of the 6 or 7 generators around Europe, so England or the northern states or the Baltic region and so on. And throughout the 5 phases of the game, you're having to build and improve your infrastructure to deal with the ever-increasing demand of energy consumption whilst transitioning away from fossil fuels into renewable energy. Now, someone who works in the energy industry myself found it's truly representative, as much as a game really could be, of that kind of industry. And it's such good fun. It really does feel like you're working in that industry. There's a degree of push your luck as you're developing some technologies that might not be so
you get
permanent. So you've got solar,
swinginess in particularly in the renewable energy. So swinginess in how much they produce.
Yeah, so solar and wind might only give you 50% of your expected demand, and therefore you suddenly got this deficit, which you then need to trade off with other players or external regions, which is where that economy game really comes.
And you get unpredictability in the demand as well, right?
Yeah, it starts with a middle weighted D6 and then increases to 2d6 and 3d6 in later phases. You get more money the more demand, so that's good. You can build and buy and increase your technologies, but it's just a really clever mixture of technologies and real life science. It's good fun, and I'm super happy that I backed it when I did.
It was funny. I think the one time I've got to play the game, other than the very beginning of the game when we initially seeded all of the sort of neutral states that have energy demands.
Yeah.
Every single time we had to renew a demand for a region, it was always...
Were you on the all red game?
It was always red.
Yeah. I've had 2 games, one's all red and one was almost all green. There's always
never any surplus energy. And everyone was desperately struggling just to try and keep afloat the entire time because no one could produce or sustain any additional energy.
It's hard to create excess generation. Yes. Yeah. Quite true to life in real.
It's interesting, I guess, because that means that the game is going to be replayable because you have the random element with demand or the supply and demand management.
Yeah, you've always got external markets which vary on a dice roll. You've always got other players who'll be going off on wild tangents, shutting down coal stations way before they really should, and then going, "Oh no, I can't light anything anymore."
There's trade. You can trade between other players as well.
You can, and you can barter in that sense. It's not a set volume,
or sell away your excess to someone else who has storage capacity.
And if it all sounds quite nerdy and sciencey, it is only up to a point, but a bit, as I say, I mentioned smartphone ink at the beginning. It's only as nerdy as that is in terms of knowing anything about phones. It's more about table presence and working out how everyone else is dealing with stuff.
If you're not interested in nerdy, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so that's your number 10. My number 10 is something that I know we've talked about a few times before. It is Big Boss.
Yeah.
There's something really, really satisfying about Big Boss being very tactile. You get a massive stack of translucent building blocks. Almost feels like Duplo. It's like big Lego.
These big, chunky, stackable pieces.
Yeah. And the game at its core, it's a remake of an old game, but the game at its core is essentially managing risks, investing in companies and shares.
But not necessarily your own companies. You don't ever really own the company.
You do not own companies. So you are essentially sort of playing a game of investment in companies, watching them grow, manipulating how they grow, and then hoping that at the end of the day, when companies start to collide, that they merge in a favourable way to you that lets you sort of come out on top, and then you can manipulate more markets moving forward.
It's a deceptively simple game in its true mechanics, but then the above table negotiation, or it's not even negotiation, it's not like you're bargaining with people to do certain things. It really is about hedging your bets and getting the right amount of shares in the right place at the right time.
There's not really any direct player interaction, but there's loads of indirect interaction in the drafting of the cards because ultimately there's only 50 positions on the board.
I believe it's 72.
72? Well, there you go. You remember better than me. So there's 72 positions on the board, and there is one numbered card that represents each face.
Yeah, each plot can only have one
There are
play, as it were.
No duplicate cards, and there is an open market for cards. So you can always see what cards are coming out. You don't necessarily know what cards are in people's hand at the beginning of the game, and you don't necessarily know what people draw if they draw blind. But the vast majority of the cards get picked up face up, and if you know or you keep track of who has a certain plot, you could potentially try and convince them to play that card at a time that is beneficial to you.
Yeah, so you might have had like the red building creeping up to space 24 and then the green building creeping up to space 26 from the other direction, and whoever has 25 will be the one that does the merger, and it's an incredibly powerful position to be in.
Yeah, and that person can play the card at the time that's most beneficial to them and hold out on everyone else. And almost on the flip side of the coin, if you know that you're going to be the person who stops a potential merger from happening that two other players would benefit from, you can just hold out indefinitely.
Yeah, unless it's the only card you can validly play, I think you're forced to.
You are forced to play if you can, but there are generally other options most of the time.
Yeah, it's great. I still spend most of the game feeling like I don't quite know how to play better, but it's very enjoyable for sure.
I know Wayne has said this, and I think I've said it before, but it's one of those games that's easy to pick up and play. It's relatively easy to explain and teach.
Yeah.
But it feels like you could get really good at that game.
I think you could, yeah. You can. I think you could also massively overthink it as well.
Oh yeah, but there's definitely strategy to that game, recognizing how companies are sort of moving together and trying to balance the share prices between them in a most beneficial way, and being careful about which cards you pick up and how you spend your money to potentially hold out on mergers or expedite them, which is really interesting. And every time we've played, it's always been like a really close game.
It has been, yeah. It's good fun. We've got a full episode available on this one, so do go check that out if you want to hear more of a deep dive.
Lovely. Okay, Simon, you're number 9.
This is one of the couple that I don't own. This is Starship Captains from CGE.
Really like Starship Captains. I haven't had a chance to play this in quite a while.
It's been ages, probably over a year since I played this.
No.
It stuck with me, obviously. It's not Star Trek, distinctly independent.
Legally distinct from the franchise that won't be named.
I really want to know what Peter Hofgaard's going to do next, if anything. This was his first game, and he did so well with it.
It was so popular when we saw it at Spiel.
Yeah, so this is a kind of comic sci-fi set action selection game, I suppose is my best descriptor for it. You've got a select number of coloured workers, red, yellow and blue. Each does a certain different type of operation within your starship.
But they sort of represent the different departments.
Yeah,
right?
so you've got your sciencey and your pilots.
Science, engineering, and tactical.
Security?
Or security.
Close enough. But yeah, they each do a slightly different kind of thing. And the different combinations of them will be required to complete the missions, which are kind of the main part of the game. So you pilot your ship across the pretty cool looking spaceport along these curvy routes, sometimes fighting off space pirates.
Pirates, yeah.
Who you can trade and do other things with, maybe mangle them into robots, Tom, make them Cybermen.
Yeah, you can fight the pirates, capture the pirates, and then you might just happen to have some useful upgrades that let you turn captured pirates into robots and then sell the robots on to other people.
Great fun. It's not sandboxy, I'd say. It's quite, do the missions. There's a couple of other upgrade tracks which will give you points and bonuses as you go. But it kind of feels sandboxy in the way you can approach it, because you can lean heavily into the open drafting tech side, or you can train all of your candidates to be a certain type of worker.
It's interesting because you can customize your crew to have a certain bias of color, right?
Yeah.
And then ultimately you will be managing the order in which those actions happen. It's a queue. You have to decide in which order you want to use your guys, and you can plan several turns ahead as a result, because you know what colours are going to be coming up and being available. And if you have the right upgrades that let you use certain colours in a certain order, you can get some really powerful combinations.
Yeah, so you've got your ready room of workers that are available that round, and once they are used in order, they get pushed into the back of the queue. And you've got this corridor at the top of your board, and you just shunt everyone that's into the next round.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to set the order that you do things this round to determine the order things will happen in future rounds. But as Tom says, you can kind of customize. So I think red normally does piloting, but you might turn everyone that's red into a yellow that also does engineering, because you built a tech upgrade, which allows you to pilot using some kind of engineering tech instead. You never need reds ever again, unless you need them for a mission. in which case you hire a robot who's gold, never goes
And
into
they're
your track.
wild,
And they're like
effectively,
a
yeah.
single-use thing. There's so much variability in it, and it's just so immediately accessible. I just so really, really enjoyed it.
It's one of these games that, again, is relatively easy to pick up and play and teach. But if you manage to get to grips with the action queuing, you can get some really satisfying interactions.
Yeah, definitely can.
I'm still sort of holding out the hope that there will be some sort of expansion to this.
It feels right for one.
I know we spoke to Mizoka, and he didn't have any immediate plans at the time, but seeing the popularity, I think there was definitely a possibility.
Yeah, I think that was on launch day that I nabbed him at Spiel.
Yeah. I think he was still reeling from the
I'm
popularity.
sure. I'll have to ping him a message.
Yeah.
All right, sir. You're number 9.
Okay, my number 9. So this is one that's new into my top 10, although is not, I suppose, it's now more than a year old. It's a Fox Experiment.
Aha, I thought they would be on the list
Yeah.
somewhere.
So I was pretty sure this was going to be high up. I wasn't sure it was going to be in my top 10, but actually I think my choice has been cemented having played it again recently, because I do really enjoy it.
Yeah, I think of the 4 of us in Board Stupid, you definitely attached to this more than the rest of us, and it's good to see. I think it's a great game.
There is, outside of the sort of Euro elements of this game, there is something that I really, really like about tactile elements in games, and the most tactile element in a game is having a massive handful of dice.
Yeah, more dice than you can reasonably hold without throwing them on the floor, as I did.
They're not small dice either. They're big, pastely, colourful dice.
Candy-coated chunks of fun.
Yeah, custom symbols. So the game is, at its core, a dice builder, I suppose. You build a pool of dice by customizing the Fox cubs.
Yes.
By selecting parents to favour certain traits. Now, ultimately, you will have objectives to try and breed certain traits to score points. But when you when you select your sort of mother and father, it will set a pool of dice that you get to roll for the turn. And round on round, or generation on generation, the foxes that are available will get more and more powerful, if you like. They will earn you more dice.
There's a fairly inevitable uptick in the number of dice available.
Exactly. So you start the game with maybe, I think the most dice you can roll at the very beginning is something like 6.
6 or maybe 7 with a wild dice.
You might be lucky.
Yeah.
Now, at the end of the game, I think the best we've seen is something like 18 dice, which might be nearly the maximum you can possibly have.
Yeah, I think you can get 8 from each potential parent, of which there's obviously 2, so 16.
Yeah.
And you can unlock another 4.
3 or 4 green dice. And there are a few special technologies that let you, sure, you can roll additional dice.
You can.
But you can certainly buy or re-roll dice very easily.
Yeah, roll an additional of this colour after rolling dice for your pup. So yeah, you can totally max out.
So you can get some massive, massive dice pools. The colours of the dice theoretically represent traits that are favourable for the domestication of foxes, but at the end of the day, they're just different colours and different symbols.
I don't think at any point in any play I've ever paid any attention to the
I've
specific.
definitely told people what the traits are supposed to be, and then at some point they just become bots and floppy ears and things like that. And nobody really cares. It's just the colour of the dice, and everyone wants to throw dice.
I want 3 browns, 4 blues, 2 greens, and a pink.
Okay. So you roll those dice. You're just looking to make complete symbols, and the dice range from half a symbol to 1.5 symbols.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to match up sets, sometimes using wild dice, sometimes using special tokens that you can get. And you get to build an engine, a little engine that allows you to breed additional pups in each generation, or get special science rewards, the sort of one-off benefits that you can spend, or you get new missions, so you can go broader, and you get points for the different types of foxes that you breed. There's loads of different ways to sort of play the game, and it's really interesting to sort of see how people tackle the engine building element whilst they're trying to accumulate as many dice as possible.
Yeah, you can definitely see people focusing in on different things, because you've got those special projects which you want a certain set of dice colours for, which get progressively harder to score. But then there's other on like the main board, there's other specific targets to go for.
Yeah.
And then just the overall quote unquote friendliness of your fox. You can just like volume of dice can be king at times.
The number of symbols that you get, regardless of what colour they are, contributes to what's called friendliness. So whoever gets the most complete symbols, regardless of colour, at the end of each round, whichever is the best fox cub, the most friendly fox cub, will essentially win the round and earns its owner points. Everyone else gets a consolation prize, which I always really like. And there's always sort of little catch-up mechanics in the game that way that help the people who haven't managed to get a favourable draft in the turn selection or haven't managed to win the round for friendliness. There's little things that help people keep up.
Yeah, kind of a not quite fail forward, but yeah, a bit of a catch up.
Yeah, I never feel like there's been a runaway winner.
Well, our last game, we came within 3 points of each other.
It was something like 41, 42, 43.
Yeah, and a half.
Yeah, and it was dead close all the way to the end. We didn't know who was going to win. There's a bunch of different ways to score points, and then after playing a game that seems very, very randomised, relying on loads of dice, to then land within 2 or 2.5 points of one another, I think that's a good sign for this sort of game that it's been carefully developed.
Yeah, I really agree with that.
And I really enjoyed it every time we've played. Okay, number 8, Simon.
It's a classic. It's a worker placement.
Oh.
It's had some recent challenge, but I haven't changed my list as yet, so.
Okay.
This is Lords of Waterdeep. So
oh, okay. Yeah,
the WizKids classic, the D&D themed worker placement. It's so refined and so neat in what it does. You put a worker down and you get the reward. The reward is things to help you complete your quest, and then some shenanigans in the middle.
There's fun little sort of cubes representing party members, and then you allocate them to quests, right? You sort of have to build sets of cubes which represent the different classes in D&D.
That's it, yeah. Cool. So you're a hidden lord of Waterdeep, the city in the Forgotten Realms, and you...
One of the 9 Lords of Waterdeep?
There's a number. You get one at random, and they each want you to achieve quests of a certain pairings, piety and warfare, or I mean, they don't really go together, but maybe, you never know.
It's like a paladin.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, you get a bunch of different quests. I mean, there's a thick deck of cards of quests that say, you need, and to simplify this, a purple, 2 orange, and 3 black cubes. And that'll take you 2 to 3 turns at best, at least rather, to secure those cubes by placing your worker on the spots that give you those. Problem is, each spot can also be taken by any other player, and unless you've got a very special spot,
exclusivity to the spots.
Yeah, they're going to block you out of spaces.
And someone might beat you to the quest as well.
There is that. Yeah, you start with some in hand, and then there's an open draft of more quests available. You've also got intrigue cards, which can be a small benefit.
Random bullshit card.
Well, it can be a small benefit to yourself, can be a general benefit to everyone, which some people might say, I don't want everyone to have another white cube. So...
I've definitely played that game where I essentially did nothing but gather random bullshit cards. I think I did quite well in that game. I can't remember if I won, but it was basically just throwing out stuff to trip people up the entire game.
Yeah, you've got the mandatory quests, which are another hidden intrigue card, and you effectively play that on another player and go, whatever you were planning to do, you now must do this before you can score anything else. And now I need to go and hire more clerics. But hey, that's part of the fun of it, and I don't generally like a kind of take that, I'm going to block you kind of thing, but it works so well in this. It really does suit the game. And then you've got all the buildings which expand on the base spaces available on the board. So it goes from...
You can improve the spots.
Yeah, so it might go from maybe a dozen spaces available to start with up to 20 plus, depending on whether you've got the expansion added as well. And each of those new buildings that you can pay for and add to the board become yours. You have ownership. So every time anyone uses that space, you get a passive benefit.
That you get for other people using your buildings.
Bit of kickback from being the lord that owns it in secret. But yeah, it's just so much variability, and it's kind of the epitome, even now, for worker placement games. I think I introduce a lot of people to the concept of worker placement through Lords of Waterdeep, because it's
a good entry.
It's so refined. There's, as much as there's quite a lot to do on your turn, there's only ever a certain number of things you might want to do. So it kind of narrows it down for you, which I think is really helpful.
I think it's a good entry point for people who are keen to get into slightly more complicated Euro-style worker placement games,
Yeah, it's a good step up.
it's a good segue for people who are already into things like D&D.
The theme definitely helped pull me into it. Equally, and I've said this to people who go, "Oh, I don't know anything about D&D. Can I play it?" Like, it doesn't matter.
No, not at all. You could take the skin off Lords of Waterdeep, and it would be a perfectly manageable, serviceable worker placement game with many other coatings on it.
Exactly. But the fact it is Dungeons and Dragons themed is perfect for me.
Oh yeah, definitely. My number 8 then is, I think, another new one for the top 10,
Ooh.
but one I know we've talked about at least once. It's Planet Unknown.
Hooray!
Yeah.
This, Tom, you might be surprised to hear, is further up my list.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I'm glad it made it into your top 10. So, Planet Unknown is a polyomino game about building yourself a colony on a planet.
We're not terraforming Mars, though.
No,
Not
it
strictly.
shares a lot of the looks, but not really any of the DNA.
No, it's a far lighter game
Yes.
than Terraforming Mars.
It's I think almost by necessity, polyomino games tend to be lighter. It revolves around simultaneous selection and placement, which I really like because it scales great from 1 to 6 players.
Yes, it does. We've played this at least 5, if not 6, I think, at UKG.
Yeah, I've played it with 6 several times. I've played it with 6 with the asymmetric version and the modules as well.
Nice.
And it doesn't really make the game much heavier or longer, which I think is a really good sign. I think it was slated to be one of the Spiel shortlist year before last.
It was on one of either
Yeah.
that or the Kenner Spiel. I forget which is which.
Yes, yeah, it was on a shortlist. I don't think it won, but even with a nomination, that should be a good sign of pedigree.
Yeah, it's effectively a tile placement game, but also an optimization puzzle at the same time because
Yeah.
each tile, as you say, they kind of. I mean, Tetris is the thing. If you're not sure what a polyomino is, think Tetris pieces. So somewhere between 2 and 6 squares in a linked pattern, either an L shape or a T or various things. And your planet map is effectively a grid system too. And you have to place your tiles down. I think they have to be contiguous. So once you place one, the next one has to connect.
By default, you start from an edge of the planet, and then you have to build contiguously, connected to a previous tile that you've already placed. But there are ways around that. So you can play as, for example, one of the factions. I think the basic corporations, in fact, have an upgrade that allow them to break that rule.
Yeah, you can kind of go off-piste after a certain level of development. And you do that development by choosing which tiles you're placing and in what locations you're placing them, because there's different areas of the map which might give you different things as you cover them.
You have 6 colours, effectively, on the tiles. Every tile has 2 colours, which represent different types of biomes, which at the simplest level is different types of resources.
Yeah, so you've got water and tech and
you have
biomass,
civilization, biomass, water, rovers, and technology. And then there's a 6th one, which is basically a wild one.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what the 6th.
There is a 6th one that's wild. It doesn't have its own resource track. So the 5 main ones have their own resource tracks. And every time you place a tile, you activate the 2 colours and advance the 2 corresponding tracks. Except for the wild one, which allows you to basically activate the corresponding track of an adjacent connected terrain instead. Okay? By choosing, tactically, the type of tile that you're going to place, you can favour certain tracks. And there are options to play asymmetric corporations that have different specializations in different tracks. Some of the asymmetric fractions are really wild because they have weird and wonderful tracks that do completely different things. One of the corporations has a water track, I think it is, that basically zigzags backwards and forwards across the other tracks and can get in the way of the advancement of other tracks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I've only played the standard version, and even there, it gives you so many options of which one you want to focus on and which couple of tracks you might want to push further.
Yeah.
Like getting those rovers out to pick up the rescue pods and wipe out the asteroids, which are blocking your scoring path.
I really like one of the tracks, the rover resource track, is basically playing a mini game where you drop a space rover on the planet and then it drives around on and off your tiles, trying to pick up life pods, like rescue people who've landed on the planet,
Yeah.
and or remove meteorites that land on your tiles and stop you from scoring lines or rows or columns if you leave them there till the end of the game.
It's so neat. It's such a clever little thing. And yeah, it is like a mini game. It reminds me of an old Amiga computer game from the 90s.
You do have to be careful, of course, that you don't accidentally drop a tile on your own rover because it will destroy it irrevocably.
Some people will pay that price, Tom.
Yeah, it has happened. I've had people who've done it by accident. I've had people who've been forced to do it because it was one of the only spaces they had left to place the tile.
It's all they can place. Yeah, it's painful, but it's fun. And it's so accessible as well. It took 2 minutes to really learn the basics of that, and then we just cracked on with it. So.
Yeah, and in that sort of game, being able to easily scale up to 6 players, I think is a really good selling point as well.
Yeah, definitely. That would be number 6 on the list.
Yeah.
So
Couple of spaces higher.
well in agreement with you there, Tom.
Lovely. Okay. Well, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is the all-time classic, 2 million copies sold, Wingspan.
Oh, yeah. I think it's interesting. I used to have Wingspan near the top of my list, and over time, I think it's slowly dropped down, not because it's a bad game, but just because it's been out for quite a long time.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's sort
fair
of
enough.
slowly filtered out of the games that I play on a regular basis.
There's been, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, where I've really been into the hobby, there has been a plethora, a never-ending list of super high-quality games. So the fact that Wingspan's slowly pushed out doesn't detract from its quality. As you say, it's just got more competition of equal measure.
And I think there was another recent expansion. They're still putting out content for Wingspan.
They have recently released taken some of the core mechanics, but not all of them, and then added in a whole bunch of new development tactics and other ways of playing. So it's not just Wingspan with dragons instead. It is his own game and game mechanics.
I'm definitely curious about it. I haven't had a chance to sort of lay hands on it as such, but I understand that it's sort of a bit of a Wingspan 1.5.
Yes and no. Some people will say that you don't need any existing knowledge of Wingspan, nor should you compare them. As I say, I've not played it either myself. So, I mean, by their admission, it is a development from Wingspan. So, it's called a Wingspan game.
Yeah, it's an iteration of the mechanics. For better or worse.
Yeah.
I can't make a judgment, having not played it. I'm definitely curious.
I think it's fair to say it's its own game. It's significantly different enough to say it's its own game. As for Wingspan, though, as I say, an all-time classic, released a good number of years ago now, as you say, but stands the test of time for me. I think it's so good. It's another one of those where the theme doesn't necessarily immediately strike me. I'm not an avid bird watcher of any kind. But
I don't think you have to have any interest in birds at all to enjoy Wingspan.
And this is exactly it. I think this is why
you will be forced to learn a little bit about birds along the way, though.
And I'm happy to. I think it's really fun. I actually delight in looking, at the artwork. Every single thing is gorgeous to look at. But then, there is the bit of detail in terms of its habitat location, maybe a bit of detail in its background.
Yeah, there's little sort of snippets of information on the cards as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and it all ties in with kind of how the bird might operate. Because you effectively, for those that may not have heard of Wingspan before, it's a tableau builder where you have a certain number of bird cards in hand that you're looking to build a little section of on your table. But each card, once you've played it, then gives you further activities and powers as you then run across its row of birds. So you might place a number of birds in your forest row, which normally just gives you food. The more birds you have in there, the more food you collect when you take that action. Then each of the bird cards within the row will also do more things. So you might be able to hunt with them or store more food on them, all which adds to more points or gives you more opportunity to do other things. The crows are my favourite set. They always go in the egg row. So you lay the eggs on any bird that you like, and then you trigger each of the crows in turn, and they all eat the eggs you've just laid to do other wild things like place another bird.
Scavenging mechanics that let them all combo together.
It's such a fantastic engine builder. It's been different every time I've played it. Within reason, there's a set number of cards, there's a set number of actions, but every time I play it with a new group of people, seeing the delight as they discover, oh, that's what that does. Oh yeah, now I can get 2 of those instead of 1 of those.
Combos, you're like, this triggers, and also this triggers, and these 2 things work together nicely.
Yeah, my friend Taylor in work, when I took it in there, ended up with something like 5 of the bonus scorecards all at once because they were just purposely picking. Once they'd worked out what it was, and like, oh, I'm going to play this bird to get another one.
Yeah.
And then, although they weren't necessarily progressing in other areas, they're like,
No,
I've just got
you don't
like,
necessarily-
passive bonuses over and over again.
You don't necessarily maximise the score of each of the bonus cards, but if you've got a bunch of them, just go broad.
Yeah, 5 lots of 3 is better
Yeah.
than 2 lots of 6. So it's really clever, and so it stands the test of time for me. It's one of my earlier games of that tableau building kind of mechanic.
Yeah,
And I will happily play this over and over again.
Yeah, and one we've lauded as a great entry-level game for people who are keen to get into modern board games.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's changed at all in the last few years.
No, not at all. As I say, there's not many modern board games that have shipped and sold this many things. Not that pure sales is the only measure, but I think there's a lot to be said for a game
And I do think
of this type selling.
I do think it's difficult to stand out from the crowd a little bit more these days. Since Wingspan's popularity, the last few years, the last 3, 4, 5 years, the sheer number of games across multiple multiple crowdfunding websites, it can be sometimes difficult to sift through the sheer number of games that are out there. Potentially try and get past all the hype of certain games that have a lot of, say, things like Simon with FOMO, where they're just desperate to sell you as much plastic as possible.
Yeah, this is almost the antithesis of this. This has taken such a strong core game and just made sure that it is the most accessible.
Yeah, still great. I'm going to go to another one that, I picked this up, I think more than a year ago now, but it is Northgard, Uncharted Lands.
This nearly made my top 10.
Yeah.
It's not in my top 10, but
Well, we'll have to play it again, and then maybe next time it'll be there.
Maybe, Tom.
So, Northgard, for those who don't know, is a board game adaptation of an RTS style PC game.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of it.
It's essentially a game about raising a tribe of sort of Northmen. It's not explicitly it's not explicitly Vikings, but it's essentially a stylized version of Vikings. You have to build settlement, raise armies, if you like, sort of sustain your troops and spread out around the land to collect resources. Potentially also have to deal with other players, your neighbours, or various beasts that appear around the map.
Yeah, so you're looking to explore and expand, but it's got the unique tile exploration system. I've not seen anything quite like this.
Yeah,
so you get to the edge of the map and then you don't necessarily just go, oh, here's what the habitat will look like. You get an option sometimes of 2 or 3 tiles. You choose which one you want, and then it's orientation as well, which might either close down the region you're in or open it up to a wider expanse.
Yeah,
and give you different scoring options.
All of the tiles are square, so you wouldn't think that adds a lot to the game. So the exploration is relatively straightforward in terms of how the tiles tessellate together, but every tile is split up into 2 or 3 or 4, and I think there might be a couple of 1s, into a various number of regions.
Yeah.
You'll have borders that are drawn across that tile. So when you place the tile, it will create connections with other adjacent tiles and essentially sets regions that can span across multiple tiles. They could be a region that just spans between 2 tiles, or it could be a region that spans like halfway across the map, 6 or 7 or 8 tiles.
Yeah, we've seen some that kind of circumnavigate smaller regions as they build around them.
And it's really interesting because the exploration mechanic of the game uses those tiles, but the movement mechanics of the game and the conflict of the game, if you like, and the resource collection depends on the size of the regions.
Yeah, it's just across a border, so you can move across multiple tiles as long as you haven't crossed the border.
Exactly. So you may find that your small army, if you like, that started the game several tiles away from your enemy, or one of the other players, suddenly shares a border just because you've explored in such a way that your one region that your guys started in now is enclosing several other tiles and actually connects to someone else's regions.
Yeah, it's really clever, and it gives you so many different things to think about. That being one of them, am I suddenly going to be prone to attack? But also, because you want to score more for enclosing a bigger region, you're tempted to push and push for bigger regions, and then as soon as it's closed in, you get your big score and immediately become a target for all of the resources.
You're encouraged to close regions because you get points for doing so. So you get points through exploration. You're encouraged to hold regions, so that's the sort of the army building and sort of manipulating how you move around the map and potentially fighting people, because holding regions that are closed gives you points. They also give you resources. But those aren't like the only way of scoring points. The game is also a hand builder, if you like, or a deck builder.
Yeah, because all your actions are done by card draw.
Yeah. Now, it's not a particularly crunchy deck builder because you start with 6 cards, if I remember rightly. 7 cards. You get one faction specific one, which is asymmetric, and then 6 of the same cards that everyone has.
Build a building, move a space, do something else.
Explore a tile, move, build, explore, recruit, and then 2 wild cards that are any of those 4 actions, and then a faction specific one. Essentially, you will be playing a card to take an action. But at the end of every round, and there's potentially 7 rounds.
Yeah, it's a not super long game.
At the end of every round, you will draft a new card from a market row of cards that's available and add it into your deck. It's guaranteed to be the first card that you draw for the next round, so you will always draw it next round. Then it gets added into your deck, and you get a little bit of deck building as a result. Because there's only a maximum of 7 rounds in the game, you're only ever going to be adding really 6 cards to your deck before you start to think about options to thin your deck out. So you're not really going to have a huge amount of deck customization, but the cards that you pick can really change the way that you behave when you play the game. And you can get some really interesting combinations. You can get cards that you can play in combination with other cards. Normally you can do one thing on a turn, but you might be able to play this card at the same time as this other card.
Flash option.
There's an option, to use Magic the Gathering terms. It's an instant, right?
Yep.
It's an instant card that you can play in conjunction with another card, and you could have a game where someone just picks up all of the cards that are flash cards. And I've done this before. I've had a game where I get to round 5 or something, and I draw a hand of cards, and I play all of my cards in one round. That's both good and maybe bad. If you pass first, you get your first choice of the card to get drafted into your deck for the next round.
But you're also sat
next round.
But also sat prone,
then you're sitting waiting for everyone else to take their actions, which might involve invading your land.
Yeah. So you might recruit twice and then move twice, all with the right combination of cards, and then have a fight and win 2 new territories.
Yeah,
and then that's it. You've got no reaction left.
It's an interesting balance between sort of tempo and deck building and tile placement and worker placement, sort of.
Yeah, it's a really unique
territory
combination.
Control. Not worker placement, territory control.
Yeah, a unique combination for sure. It's neatly clipped in its desire to give you too many options. I think they do really well in just giving you just enough that every game is going to feel different. Obviously, every map tile discovery placement is going to be unique in every game, and just seeing those combinations come out, it's very satisfying.
So this is a game that's interesting in that it has an optional module for adding in NPC creatures. So they're AI controlled, and they do various different things. Now, I think the intention is that they're supposed to make the tile placement a little bit more thinky, because you might want to place a tile that potentially places a creature next to a neighbour, so they have to deal with a creature, or you might need to be careful about where you place the tile so that it doesn't affect you. But the couple of times I've played with the creatures, they mostly just slow the game down. I actually prefer the game a lot more without them.
I've only done it once with the animals, and it felt like a big blocker to being able to really get at each other. We were just mitigating the animals' effects.
Definitely try not to get eaten by wolves.
Arguably, that gives you another whole swathe of gameplay that you would otherwise not do with.
It makes the game feel quite different. I don't necessarily think it's a bad game with the creatures.
Oh, no.
But I really like the game without them, which I think is perfectly fine. Now there's also a little sort of mini expansion for this as well, which adds sort of leaders with particular powers to the game, and adds Jotun giants to the game as well. So there are some other mechanics that get added to the game that I'm considering picking up because I really like Northgard. But even just it's a brilliant game. Really, really like it.
Agreed. All right, I'm going to get us a bit out of sync here, I suppose, because my number 6 option is Planet Unknown, which we've already discussed.
Already talked about that,
So
so
let's go back to you with number 6 if you want to jump on.
My number 6 is one of the monsters that occupies my shelf. This is ISS Vanguard.
Oh, I need to play more of this, Tom.
Yeah, ISS Vanguard is it's from the creators of Nemesis, and
It's a beefy
Painted
boy, is
Grey.
what he means by that.
It's a large box. And actually, I've recently had more boxes arriving.
You've got like a phantom stretch goal.
More than a year after the original box was delivered, I received a random additional box of stretch goals that I didn't even realise was coming.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I got very confused. But the base game, it's a massive spacefaring campaign game.
It's quite the odyssey, isn't it?
It really is. It's got, it's one of these monsters that's got a bit of everything. It's got a fully voice acted app that reads all of the various sort of logs and story elements out to you. It's got a huge number of binders and folders. It's got a massive administration element to it.
But that is part of the game, and it's important to note this. And I'm sure we said this before in discussion. That kind of admin side is part of the game. It's not just tidy up. It's pre-session.
It's sort of two completely different games packaged together. One of the elements of the game is the pick your own adventure, administration, upgrade your ship, train your crew sort of game.
Which is great.
Which is great. And then the other half of the game is the away missions, where you pick members from your crew, you send them to planets, and they do missions. And that becomes like a dice manipulation game.
Yeah, boxes of custom built dice sets for each player. So some might be more science oriented, some might be more science oriented.
Science, security, recon, and engineering. Yeah, it's so compelling and interesting. But it's a game that I really want to play more because the campaign is huge. It's one of the few big campaign games that I'm happy to play on my own.
Yeah, it's got a lot of flexibility in that, hasn't it? In terms of
because you don't select individual characters, you play as the whole crew of the ship. That you can, from mission to mission, you could bring in some new players. You can say, okay, today you're controlling the security department, and you'll have 5 or 6 crew members from security, and then when we do an away mission, they just pick one of those guys to bring with them.
Yeah.
You control whole segments of the crew. You control the entire crew. You can sort of recruit new people in and sort of customize the crew. You can change the specialization of your various departments by customizing the way that you fill the dice pools for those guys. And then there's a whole bunch of deck building aspects. It's just a total monster.
And as you said at the top of the show, it creates those emergent storylines then, as well as, it is a storybook effectively that you're playing in, but the result of each of those missions and how well you do or how much you fail will spur you on to pull out different versions of the mission cards for the next bit and say, oh, well, you failed to collect the green ooze on planet 9X3 without getting infected, so now this is going to happen.
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a mix between classic Star Trek, Mass Effect, particularly the first Mass Effect, where you do a lot of just sort of randomly jaunting around the galaxy. I don't know, there's probably going to be a more pressing storyline, but I've done a lot of what I feel is a little bit sandboxy.
Are you doing all the side quests first?
Yeah. Even not intentionally, but I'm having a good time doing it anyway. So
no, that's cool. I think that speaks well to the game as well. If you can play for as many hours as you have and feel like you've still got so much more to do, as long as that's what you're looking for. Some games we want 45 minutes to an hour, quick, accessible, set up and tear down, done. Others you're like, I've got an afternoon. I'm going to go exploring the nebulas.
Yeah. And it's not a short game to play, an individual session by any means. But if that is your particular bag, if you really like a campaign game and you don't want to worry too much about being married into specific characters and specific players, you can keep the game going and ramp it up and down and drop people in and out of the game very easily, which I think is actually quite difficult to do with a lot of campaign games.
Yeah, the level of complexity there that still allows you that almost drop in, drop out functionality is to be commended.
Your number 5 then, Simon.
It's another Pandasaurus title. We've had the Fox Experiment from them already.
Surprised we've only had one so far.
Well, we're on a different animal now.
Yeah.
We are in the wolves. The definition of area control for me.
Yeah, I was gonna give this one an honourable mention. Didn't quite make the cut, but I really, really like the Wolves.
What a fantastic game. A scaling map depending on number of players. Randomly selected regions within that map will be scored at different points throughout the game. And that is on a track which is timed not by rounds, but by number of pieces removed from the board by player activity.
Yeah,
so you can control when it
neutral
happens.
Pieces and other players' pieces, right?
Yeah, so if you howl at lone wolves and bring them into your pack, those lone wolves will enter the scoring track and push the timer forward. If you build certain pieces, they'll go onto the scoring track, and then if they're bumped off and replaced by opponents who have howled at you and dominated you out of the space.
Or if you upgrade your own pieces, the old piece doesn't go back on your board, it gets moved.
Yeah, your den becomes a layer, your den becomes a timer on the scoring track. So you really want to focus on the right areas at the right time and realise that, if I've got the right number of pieces in this region, I'll score. I don't want to over-invest too heavily in this region, because once it's done, and if you don't remove it from the board, the region's still there, but you don't score it again. So then you have to think, okay, so I need to swing my pack this way, or maybe I'll divide my pack from the very beginning.
Yeah, some people, I've seen some people do that, right? We've started the game, and then some people are like, I'm not even going to bother trying to contest the first scoring round. I'm just going to try and move and cement my scoring for one of the later rounds, which are potentially more swingy.
Yeah, they do score higher in later rounds, but also far more contested generally.
Okay.
It'll be a randomized setup, as I say, so it might be that first round scoring and last round scoring are next to each other, or they might be opposite ends of the board, which gives a whole different race element. And then this unique action trigger, which is these flippable tiles.
Yeah.
It was a thing that initially drew me in, well, beyond the gorgeous box art. But yeah, these tiles, one to match each of the terrain types, plus one of your own speciality.
So I really like this, but I've heard quite a lot of people, maybe not complain, but quite a few people have struggled with this mechanic because it can be quite tricky to plan your turns.
I get that. Yeah, it's a challenge to almost pre-program.
Because it's a bit of a programming puzzle, and you need to sort of be able to visualize what your action selection is going to look like after you've taken the first action. So it doesn't necessarily work well for some people.
I get that. Yeah, it won't be for everyone, and I'm not going to argue that. You know, that's how your brain works. I had a conversation with someone recently about they really like something, and I was like, well, it just simply doesn't work for me. It's not me degrading the game. It's just it doesn't work. So yeah, fair enough. But I quite like that element of being able to think, if I do this one now, that'll give me 2 rocks, and if I flip both rocks, it'll give me 3 grass, which means I can do this super cool action.
At its heart, it is a programming puzzle. It's quite a heavy Euro. It's reasonably crunchy in terms of the mechanic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's essentially no randomization after the board setup.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just have to.
Yeah, you're not rolling any dice. It depends on what everyone else does.
And it's one of those games where, because I think that mechanic can be a little bit difficult to grasp, if you're playing with people who've played the game a few times before and people who've not played the game before, people who've not played the game before can get really punished while they try to get to grips with that mechanic.
I can see that happening. As a teacher of this myself, I suppose what I'd say is, don't be a dick.
Yeah, you have
if
to
you're teaching someone new,
there's a point in every time we've played this game, there's a point at the beginning of the game where you need to highlight to someone that they can potentially lose a piece early on. It's really critical and crippling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that comes down to player group rather than the game design. It's true of a lot of things. You can go hard and fast on a bunch of games and potentially rip apart people that never touched it. That's not unique to the Wolves. I love the design, the art style really speaks to me. I just think it's really clever. And then you've got the kind of customization or asymmetric side in how you develop your wolf pack. You can become faster or spread quicker or move more pieces or build in a certain way. All of which score you points and allow you to do more as the game develops.
Yeah.
But everyone can do that in a slightly unique way, and I think it's very, very well done.
My number 5. Now, I'm trying to remember if this was in my top 10 last time. You have a list.
I can tell you some.
Okay. Number 5, and I'm pretty sure this has gone up, that's for sure, is Gaia Project.
Not on your
Not
list
even
of
in my
last
top 10.
year.
Okay. Maybe there was a burst of popularity with this where I think I played it about 4 weeks in a row.
At Games Club, you spammed the hell out of this.
And
I wasn't there for
There
it.
were
I was
other
just watching in the
people who
background.
had copies of it, and I think at one point we had it on 2, possibly 3 tables at once.
Yeah, you kind of triggered a fandom for a good month.
Yes, yeah. So I played it once, and then everyone was like, "Oh, I really wanted to play that," and then someone else had said, "Oh, I've got a copy as well." And then there were several weeks where it was played in parallel, multiple tables back to back.
Yeah, you had Mark and Rob and Mateus all going crazy for it.
So
it's good to see.
Gaia Project, if you don't know, is one of, if not the heaviest Euros on BGG.
It looked pretty damn complicated when I was looking over.
It is in the Terra Mystica family of games.
Another title I've yet to play.
It's okay. It shares a lot of the mechanics, but it's essentially like a 1.5 in that it's taken a lot of the stuff from Terra Mystica that people didn't quite like or wanted to improve on and integrated it into the base game. Some of that stuff was then added to Terra Mystica as an expansion later on.
Right.
So I think they're mostly on an even footing, more or less, these days in terms of mechanics and complexity, but there's a lot of very good things that people say about Gaia Project. Gaia Project is not for the faint-hearted, for sure. It is a very, very heavy Euro. It has asymmetric factions that do very, very different things, and it has a random seeding of objectives so scoring objectives for each round, plus scoring objectives for the end of the game that are all set up randomly at the beginning of the game. And after the initial seeding of the game with the sort of potential scoring targets, there is not a single random element to the entire game. Every single thing can be planned, and there's actually not even a huge amount of player interaction.
That sounds weird to me.
Yes, it's not a 4x, it's more like a 3x. It has no combat, that you cannot fight other players.
Right.
The only thing you can do is get in their way and try and reach a planet and colonize it for yourself before they can.
So this is space politics, space gerrymandering.
It is space economy. Yes. You can explore, you can colonize planets, you can build a big network for trading, you can upgrade, so you can build and upgrade buildings that give you bonuses, and a lot of it is sort of like an engine builder that gives you various different benefits, different incomes. It's quite interesting in that every time you build a building, the old building, if you've upgraded an old building to a new one, the old building goes back on your track, and sort of scythe style, when you uncover a space on a track, that is normally income. So as you gain income from your new building, that might be, for example, science, you may have to put back an old building that then reduces your income of a different resource.
Okay, so it's not strictly
sort of balance between
not a strict upgrade on benefits.
No. You sort of you have resources going up and down, your incomes go up and down all of the time. You get loads of different specializations that you can follow, all the different factions. I think there's like 16 different asymmetrical factions.
That's a big number.
It is.
I'm trying not to reference the other big game.
The other big game, which is most certainly not a Euro, but it's like a very, very crunchy Euro, and it's right in my sort of niche. You need to have the right people to play with, and they need to be prepared to come to a game that's going to be very, very difficult to get to grips with, but it can be really, really satisfying to play.
It sits in that I want to play it, but I'm not scared, but it's like maybe intimidated of it.
It can be a real brain burn, yeah. But that might be your thing. That might be a good thing.
Oh, I can absolutely understand why it's in your top 5 there, Tom.
Okay, you're number 4.
I mentioned it briefly already, and I think you just name dropped it again yourself. The Ever Wonderful Scythe.
Yeah, lovely.
Again, I think this maybe has gone off the boil for some people in
the
last couple of years
as well.
And again, it's understandable, but this is the next level again to that kind of planning and management of a worker placement type action selection game beyond Waterdeep.
Not a war game. You look at the board and you think, okay, this is a this is a territory control war game, and then it's not.
Yeah, they're not troops and war machines. They are kind of farming vehicles.
Territory control.
Yeah,
And logistics and shipping resources around.
We've long since said this is a Cold War game. It is the
Yeah.
threat of combat. And combat does make a part of the game. There's no denying that. But you can win without ever having a fight in it. Again, for those who don't know, which probably a smaller number than those who have heard of it, that might be listening to this at least, you've got a big old map of hexes. There's beautiful, detailed terrain. You can kind of zoom in and see some cool little Easter egg type things. You've got villages and mines and forests, all of which gives you different resources depending on the action that you've selected on your turn. And then you're looking to control as much territory as you can whilst developing specific resources and finding different routes so you can have certain hidden objectives that you need to complete to gain a star, one of 6 that you need to score to trigger the end of the game.
Yeah, I really like the end game and scoring mechanism in that you essentially have it's first to complete 6 objectives from a wider pool of objectives. So you don't have to build along the same track as everyone else.
No, and you don't necessarily want to trigger the end of the game just because you can. I've actually had a friend almost felt like they raced with, oh, I can do this, and then
I could end the game, but actually I have a bad multiplier on my loyalty.
Yeah, and they haven't realised.
You might not want to win the game. You might not want to trigger the end of the game yet.
Yeah, last time I remember playing this with Jason and James at Me for Minded, James hadn't quite realised that I'd nudged my popularity up to the point where I was in the next bracket of scoring. And that as a variable thing that you almost spend your victory point scoring ability to do certain objectives, and then you have to gain it back as the game goes on. I don't really know many games that do it in quite that fashion.
Well, I know one, Expeditions. From Jamie Sigmar as well. Indeed, It essentially has exactly the same scoring and end game mechanisms.
Yeah, within the Scythe universe, a beautiful addition to the catalogue there.
For me, my favourite thing about Scythe, and probably always has been, is the art direction. Like the world building with Scythe is just brilliant.
Yeah, a while ago, someone asked about what games I'd like to see turned into movies, and this was my first and top pick.
Yeah.
Can you imagine an alternate 1920s with this Soviet threat and his giant-ass robots?
Yeah.
I think it'd be absolutely fantastic if they did it right, and I'm really hoping that someone options it and does it well at some point.
Yeah, and with Expeditions, you sort of see like another iteration of the story. It's like an advancing world building. You've got all this sort of like weird science being introduced in Expeditions.
These dark meteors that brought some almost Cthulhu-esque weird creatures with them in the depths of Siberia. Yeah, I think Scythe's over Expeditions for me still.
Yeah.
Expeditions introduced some fantastic ideas and different ways of exploring the hex tiles and achieving your goals, and that you have to boast about them rather than just you did it so it's happened. You have to still then prove that you
there's a little bit more action management in Expeditions over Scythe.
Yeah, for sure. Scythe has got a bunch of add-ons as well, and I think, at least on my list, I'm largely looking at the core game here rather than core game plus add-ons, but Scythe particularly had some fantastic additional content.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a short campaign style thing with the Rise of Fenris.
The extra factions are great.
Invaders from afar, which introduce more mechanics and so on.
There's the campaign.
Yeah. It's just so clever. There's so many, if not unique, mechanics in it. The combination of them and how you can only take the same action once without having to do something else. So you can't just spam
unless you're the Ruskies.
Well, yeah. It's a bit like one of those, bit like in Rising Sun, where you look at every faction and go, well, why are you allowed to do that? That seems broken. And you look at your own and like, actually.
Oh, hang on. This is also overpowered in a completely different way.
If not an entirely unique game every time, I've had significantly different games with different groups of people that have approached it in totally different ways. Some hammering into power and combat, others racing to the factory for exploration and control and more options on their turns.
Yeah.
And others basically just farming, and all of them are as valid as the next.
Oh, and I've seen people win probably in all of those different paths.
Yeah, definitely. It stands out as if someone says to me, "Oh, you like board games?" and you try and you say, "What? Like what?" and you go, "Well, if you've not heard of it, this will kind of blow your mind."
Yes.
I think Scythe is one of the top ones for going, "Here's what modern gaming can do," and it never fails to surprise me.
Yeah, definitely. Lovely. Now, I'm now entering the realm of cemented games that I probably think are not going to move anytime soon from my
Okay,
top 10.
I'm curious if it's going to be the same top four as last time.
Might not be in the same order, but I think it's still might still be the same top 4. So
I think that's fair enough. That's kind of what we want, right?
number 4 is Terraforming Mars.
Down from number 3.
Yeah, there you go. Terraforming Mars is now a fairly old game.
Yeah, was this 2014, 2015?
Something like that. I think it's coming up on 10 years, if not already. It's a game about colonization. You get to build out piles on Mars to build cities and start to sort of work towards terraforming the planet. The goal of the game sort of is to act as a corporation and work towards a shared objective of making Mars habitable by terraforming it.
Yep.
That sort of acts as a timer for the game, and most of the stuff that you do will advance one of the various tracks that will sort of progress towards ending the game in one way or another, so it's an inevitability. It's mostly an engine builder. You will be playing an absolute shed load of project cards.
So many cards.
So many
Even with
cards.
those enormous game tables we have at club, we still ran out of space. I was having to stack them almost
I've had
sideways on
games
a
where
chair.
people have played like 30 different projects, or possibly even more. You have different colours of projects. Some of them are like a one and done. You play a thing, it stays on the board, doesn't do anything after you've played it.
Yeah.
Some of them have ongoing passive effects or active effects that you can trigger once a round to do another thing. You get little elements that sort of interact between all the different cards. Every card has symbols on it that will then often tie into the effectiveness of other cards. So there's like lots of strategy in the way that you draft your cards.
Yeah, so for every yellow you have, you get one of this resource. Yeah. So if you've got 4 yellow, you get 4 of the resource.
And there's asymmetric factions. Some of the factions favour certain types of project cards. Like, you might have the faction that gets money every time an event happens. That's a certain type of card. And then you just spam loads of events for money, right? But there's loads of different ways to play the game. There's loads of variety in the asymmetrical factions. I know some people don't really like the way that the drafting works and they feel it's too random because there's a massive deck of projects.
There's so much in there. I did feel kind of
It
lost.
can be a little bit overwhelming, but I think it's much improved with the addition of some of the small box expansions.
Okay.
Prelude gives you an accelerated first and second round of the game by giving you more drafting options at the beginning of the game to sort of set you up on a path to play the game.
It's a bit more focused.
Yeah, it'll give you more initial resources and it'll give you some additional sort of benefits that you can trigger at the beginning of the game that give you an idea of which way to focus.
It's amazing how much of a difference that small addition can make, actually. If you give someone 1 or 2 things that they already know what, it's certain.
Here's your selection of Prelude cards, which are little bonuses at the beginning of the game. Here's your selection of corporations. Look at them. Which ones sound like they work together? Okay, pick those. Now you've got an idea of where to go.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you might then change your mind a few rounds into the game, you get an idea of where to go at the beginning of the game, where it's otherwise a very broad game with lots of options. But I don't think I've ever not enjoyed Terraforming Mars. And it can be a bit random and swingy, and the drafting doesn't always work in your favour. But I really like Terraforming Mars.
No, that's great, man. From what I have played of it, a great title.
Yeah.
If not somewhat overwhelming.
It can be, and it can be slow. I do admit that it suffers from those sort of things because it is a heavy game.
Yeah, there's a lot to look at each turn.
But if you play with people who've played the game before and you play with maybe 3 or 4 players, then it's very enjoyable.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm going much lighter on my pick for number 3. We're in the top 3, Tom.
Yeah.
This is Cascadia.
Couldn't
get much more simple than Cascadia.
It doesn't surprise me that this is up there in your top 3 because we talk about this a lot.
I've loved it from the moment I picked it up. It was a fairly random selection from me back in the days when the comic shop existed in Crawley. And I saw it on the shelf and then it wasn't there again. I didn't pick up the
little box on the shelf and you're like, oh, that looks interesting. Nice and light.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it. So I looked at it, put it down, went away, came back and it wasn't there. And then a couple of weeks later it was, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to buy this game I've never heard of.
It piqued your interest at the time, which it's enough to get you to look into it, and then it's worked out.
It's so much fun. It is such a simple game in its premise, which is pick a landscape tile, a terrain tile, and an animal in a pair, and then place them into your growing.
Draft a pair of things from a market row. and place them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
one,
want
one animal, one tile.
you want to try and get your terrain pieces to match as best you can,
Yeah.
or to increase the ones that you're looking to go for. So you want to maybe increase your mountain range or extend your rivers or your
Yeah.
prairie. And then the animals will go in only on certain tiles, maybe not the one you've just picked up, but you need the right space to put them in.
Yeah.
And the animals all have their own scoring criteria. There's variances on what those are. So you've got, I think, 5 or 6 different scoring tiles per animal.
Yeah, you randomize the scoring every time you play the game, don't you?
Yeah. So
there's
you
different
want, you
there's
know,
different ways of scoring each time you play that may favour certain ways of sort of laying out your animals in
Yeah.
certain sort of contiguous ways.
So
Or
set A, you want pairs of bears. But in set B, it's a mating pair. So you then want the cub. So you want a group of 3 with no other bears near them. Set A for the hawks. They want not to be near another hawk. They compete for food. So they just
Yeah.
want to not be near each
Yeah.
other. But then in set B, they want line of sight to another one. So that you want them still not next to each other, but in a bit more of a specific setting. And then the salmon and the elk and so on all want certain positioning. So it's like a dual layered puzzle. You want your terrains to match and maximize the length of them there.
Yeah.
And then your animals on top of them to determine the scoring in that regard. So this dual layer setting. And everyone I've played it with has picked it up really well because it is that simple. They go, oh, okay, yeah, so I want yellow bits next to yellow bits. Yeah, you do, that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Or maybe you want the forest. If you put the forest here,
it's quite easy to see the scoring as well.
I think so. Yeah.
You lay out the scoring at the beginning of the game and you go, okay, these are the things you want to aim for. You want to lay out certain animals in certain formations. Have a think when you're going to pick up your tiles. Have a think about which animals can go on which tile and which ways you want to lay out your animals. Done. That's it.
That is exactly it. Yeah, it's beautifully simple while still having enough depth of fun in there as well. It's only 20 turns. It never hangs around. You can play solo, and there's a little addition for that.
Plays real quick.
Yeah,
which is great.
And the recent addition of the landmarks as well to give a whole extra scoring criteria really added to the game. And yeah, it's just
Brilliant.
It's just so fun.
Cool. All right. Number 3. I think it was in my top 10. I know I've definitely forgot to include this in my list at least once. Not intentionally, but it is the omnipresent route.
This was number 4 last year.
Oh, yeah. So
you've
Terraforming
switched.
Mars and Route have switched position. Route is just wonderful. It's a game about woodland slaughter.
Yeah, you see, you've taken my lovely landscapes of Cascadian, and you've just run riot in
Yeah,
it.
it's less Animals of Farthingwood and more Redwall.
Yeah,
For
or
those who know the old reference.
Watership Down.
Watership Down. Yeah, but with more swords.
More ambush.
Yeah. So this is a highly asymmetrical game where everyone's basically playing their own game.
It's an absolutely balmy proposition. When I first saw this at Wayne's a few years ago, and I was looked at it and went, sorry, you what?
Yeah. Everyone's going to have to play like completely different mechanics with completely different scoring. Like even some of the basic ways that the movement works differently for different factions.
It's insane. Yeah, I think you played as the cats the first time, and Wayne went, right, so Tom's going to be looking to build things and fight people.
Yeah, that's straightforward. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to be the Woodland Alliance, so I'll be going around kind of sowing discourse and
popping up here and there,
revolutionise people." All right, that's weird. And it's like, oh, you're going to be the Eyrie, and you're going to have to choose ahead of your turn what you're going to do, and make sure you got the right cards, or everything's going to fall into disarray. And
you have to play a programming puzzle, and if you don't do your programming in the right order every turn, you just fall to pieces. You're penalised.
And by the way, there's this 4th player option where you don't even go in the player space.
The 4th player is playing D&D.
Kind of a mind-boggling game, but the design is incredible.
And that is just the core game. And then they've added like 8 other factions on top of that, and they still mix and match and work together in such a crazy way every single time. It blows my mind how this game was designed.
I don't understand how they've achieved it. I really don't. That combination of those 4 I've just described in themselves felt incredible to me. That they've added so many more that do, again, quite distinctly different things on top.
Some of them very different.
And you can still have a balanced game with it.
Mm-hmm. I think there's certain combinations they recommend you don't play, but you can play.
Okay, is that because some kind of require
Yeah,
the player
So,
type?
because the game board is always a certain size, it generally recommends against piece-heavy factions. It generally, you have certain factions that favour territory control more than others,
Yes.
and having a number of pieces on the board more than others. So normally it says don't really play with more than 2 of that type of faction, because if you have 3 or 4 like heavy territory control factions, they're all going to suffer by not being able to get many of their pieces out and not being able to hold many locations.
I can see that being an issue, yeah.
Whereas there's a bunch of other factions that don't care so much about the territory control or play in a sort of passive way where they can occupy spaces with other players, then it becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, they just happen to be in town rather than fighting to keep control of it.
Yeah, exactly. And we're on to number 2.
Oh, blimey. My most recent purchase.
Oh, okay.
Not the newest game. Well,
No, but
No,
I thought it was going to be in the list. I didn't know where it was going to be, but we got as far as 2 without it appearing.
yeah.
Heat.
Heat has rocketed to the top of near top of my
Heat's
list.
brilliant.
I just, every time I played it, I just had a constant grin on my face, and then I found myself thinking about it when I wasn't playing it. It's one of those kind of.
I like race cars.
And, I'm not the biggest petrol head in the world. I watch Top Gear when it's on, but it just had such a fantastic, clean way of making a race game exciting.
It's
turn after turn.
It's really interesting. So it has a bunch of the DNA of its predecessor, Flamme Rouge.
Yeah, which I've never played, but I've heard pretty good things about.
I really like Flamme Rouge, but it's sort of built on top of that and really improved. I do want to say it's improved on the way the sort of card selection and speed manipulation, I guess, works.
Yeah.
For the game.
I don't think I've played a game quite like it in this sense. I don't think I've played that many racing games.
No, racing games are relatively few and far between. And I think they're quite tricky to pull off because of the way most board games work as turn-based and not necessarily simultaneous. It's difficult to sort of emulate the moment-to-moment sort of decision-making of like a racing game.
I agree, and I think it has managed to, at least for me, achieve that sense of speed and feeling like you're turn to turn having to make those quick decisions.
I think in a way you spend more of the game trying to outwit the track than the other players.
Yes, although I think there's different approaches available as well. For me, I'm possibly a bit more moderate, so I'm generally looking to make sure I get round the corner at just the right speed.
Yeah.
I've definitely played with people who don't really care about that, and they're looking to slipstream off the back of other people and try and
there's elements
mess with them in that
pushing your luck, guessing where players are going to be, trying to maximise slipstreaming, those sorts of things.
So for those, quick recap for those who aren't familiar with Heat Pedal to the Metal, came out end of 22, I think. You are playing in the golden age of racing, it's kind of 50s, I think. So open top, leather cap and goggles kind of, rather than sleek F1 cars. You've got 4 maps out of the box. There's a recent edition with 2 more maps.
I think it's pretty good.
It feels generous.
Yeah.
It
getting
really does.
4 different setups for a racing game. But there are not many games that give you a bunch of different maps.
Yeah, 2 full-size double-sided boards is really generous feeling. You get a basic deck to start with, so you've got different speed cards, 1, 2, 3, and 4 speed, and then a 0 and a 5 at each end, and then some stress cards, which are a bit of a randomizer, and then some heat, which sits in the middle of your deck. On your turn, you have a hand of 7 cards, and you play as many cards of speed that you like compared to the gear that you're in, and you can move up and down gears relatively freely. If you want to slam up a couple of gears at once, you have to pay a bit of heat into your engine. And heat is effectively a resource that you have to learn how to spend and manage before
you might
completely slam
when you look at it, you might think, oh well, hang on. In a deck builder game, I don't want the card blocks up my hand, because that's always bad, except in Heat, where you have to spend it, otherwise you will fall behind.
It's almost inevitable you will have to spend it at some point. My first game round, I almost refuse to touch it. Like, no, I'm
Yeah.
going to be incredibly moderate. I'll only ever go the right pace.
Stuck in second gear all the time.
It kind of works up to a point. You get opportunities to flush it out of your hand with certain cooldowns, but you can only do that at a certain gear or if you're in a certain position. So if you're in last place, you'll always be able to cool down one out of your hand. It's got a great catch-up mechanism.
Yeah, but because you are allowed to accumulate those heat cards if you're falling behind, you're allowed to do that because you will naturally be able to bleed some off.
Yeah, it just manages all those different options so well. And you kind of think, well, why wouldn't I go as fast as I want every time? Well, you can up to a point, and then you've got this countdown to the corner.
Yeah.
And each corner, you can only go a certain speed across its speed check line. If you go too quick, you're going to spin out. You then need to pay more heat.
Not necessarily.
Well, yeah, more likely than not. If you've not got enough heat to pay out of your engine to manage the difference, then yes, you are going to spin out and you're going to be reset to that corner. If you get more than one corner behind, it's going to be real tricky for you to catch back up. But it can be done. The catch-up mechanism, some people I think don't appreciate quite how nuanced it is, but I've seen it happen again and again, how people have been 15 to 20 spaces behind, and
there can be some very
contention.
sudden comebacks, which is really cool.
And the course layout, sometimes the corners are only 5 to 8 spaces apart, so you can't slam on the speed again after a slow turn.
No.
Other times they're really open and you can pretty much maintain third gear most of the way around the track. And there's an element of luck in the card draw, but then there is that manipulation and control of all. I know roughly what I've used so far. You're not allowed to look through the spent cards officially. You
just got to remember.
You've got to remember roughly how fast you're going. You might be, stressing yourself out by constantly spinning out or coming close to it, and therefore you're never really sure how fast you're going. And it all just adds to that excitement and genuine feel of racing around. As I say, I've not played many racing games. This is by far the best racing game of that pure style, and I'm so excited to play it again. Every time I think about it, I'm like, oh, quick game of Heat.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't play that long either.
No, if you don't pile in all of the extra modules, it's coming off.
And of course, all the extra modules just allow so much more expansion on the game. Where beyond those
customization,
beyond those basic speed cards, you've got tires and brakes and turbos and stuff, which allow you to absolutely run riot.
Lovely. Okay, my top two. I think they might still be the same way around. I can't remember which way around they were.
I think they are.
Number two is Twilight Imperium.
Ooh.
They must have switched positions.
It's not number one. I'm shocked. I'm shocked.
Twilight Imperium still has a very special place in my heart. I love Twilight Imperium. It's such a ridiculous spectacle.
Special place in your heart and in your living room and your dining room.
Yeah,
and your bathroom.
sometimes both. Yeah, all rooms at the same time. Anyone who has got into modern board gaming over the last 10 years, 15 years will probably know about Twilight Imperium.
It's a legendary game.
It's very, very famous, but it's not necessarily famous for good reasons because
it's infamous almost.
Yeah, because it's the game that takes an entire day to play. That is such a monumental task to get through that many people probably will never even give it a try.
I would struggle to explain it to someone who hadn't heard of it.
It is not necessarily a whole day because it depends who you play with, but it is a huge, long game about political bullshit, backstabbing, territory control, all sorts of stuff. It is
a heavy amount of combat. From what I remember.
Not necessarily.
No?
No, it's not Space Risk.
Why did I get killed so many times then, Tom?
Well, it can be Space Risk, but it doesn't need to be Space Risk.
So I'm just doing it wrong.
No, I've played plenty of games of Twilight Imperium where the winner never picked a fight. All they needed to do was convince other people that they weren't in a position to win and not pick a fight and get enough sort of alliances and enough troops in certain strategic locations that they weren't easy to take down at the end of the game, they can win the game. Kieran won one of the games by staying in his home slice for the entire game and just mining his own planets for artifacts.
Amazing. I mean, I believe it.
Yes.
He's a bright boy, our Kieran.
I hate Kieran because he keeps winning. But yeah, it's such a huge game, and we've spoken about it at length. I don't think it surprises anyone that it's still up there in the top two.
Yeah, it is an epic game. It's an epic experience. It feels like more of an experience than a game experience.
It's an experiential thing with some mechanics.
Yeah, there's quite a depth of rules, and then there's a lot of above table.
There's a lot
Open
of
to whatever the people at the
negotiation and
table want to do.
bullshitting and promising and not promising people stuff. So
It's yeah. I know why you love it, but I'm unlikely to play it anytime soon. It's fair enough, you know. We don't want to pick the same title all the time. Okay, so then the fabled number one as of now / January when I originally made this list.
hasn't changed since then. Don't think.
I didn't want to redo the ranking.
Oh, fine.
Arguably, any of my top 10 could be the number one at any given point, but for a varying number of reasons, Skate Summer is still my number one pick.
Well, okay. Don't think I was expecting that at all.
No, it honestly surprises me a little.
Yeah.
It's a fairly light game in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But there's something about it. It might be that X factor that I'll struggle to really define and exemplify why exactly it's my number one pick.
It has some fun mechanics to emulate the theme of the game. The pushing your luck balancing thing, I think, is a really great central mechanic.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Skate Summer is, and I don't think the designer would hate the comparison, it's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, the board game. It's about as close as you'll get to that. You are playing from a whole bunch of tricks that you get dealt at the start of the game. Some are vert tricks, some are kind of rail tricks, and others are flatland street tricks.
They basically boil down to 3 colours.
Red, yellow, and blue. And some people, they'll take it as that base level. Is red, yellow, or blue? Which am I doing?
I know about a skateboard.
There's kind of multiple reasons why you choose them, which is where I think my enjoyment of this game really comes from. You'll get points for every trick that you safely land, and you'll get a different multiplier for each of those different colours. So you might have invested more in your blue tricks than your yellow tricks.
Yeah.
So you want to play more blue tricks than yellow tricks. But the tricks that you play also determine where you move around the city of Pelican Park.
Yeah, it becomes,
in the second phase of the game.
It becomes sort of like movement points, but the movement points are colour locked.
Exactly. So you might need a combination of red, yellow, blue to get to the scoring point that you need on the main map. But you don't want to play those tricks because they're not going to score you as many points.
Or they might
in that section of the game.
Tilt you in the wrong direction for the balancing.
Indeed, they might. So, yeah, and that's the other fantastic part of the game for me. And I like my certainties in life, Tom, as you know. So the fact
I love a push your luck.
The fact I love a push your luck element as much as I do kind of shocks me. But every time you play a trick, you then roll the balance dice, and it increases by the number of tricks that you play. So in the first round, everyone simultaneously plays a trick.
Yeah.
The king skater rolls one balance die, and it'll tell you move one left or one right.
Everyone is pushed by that dice.
Yeah, and it might be blank, and you don't go anywhere, and that's fine. And then you'll have been moved off your center balance by the trick you've played. So you might have got 2 to the left.
Yeah, left or right or back to the middle.
And then you can choose, you can either play another trick and maybe move yourself back to the center, or maybe move yourself further to the left in the hope that the dice then swing you back the other way. And you can keep going, and you can keep going up to a total. I think you can play 9 tricks if you really want to push things.
You're really lucky.
But at that point, you're rolling 9 dice. And bear in mind that you've got I think 2 in 3 chance of rolling a direction.
Of a pip, yeah.
And there's not that many pips on the balance track to move, so you can be hard left.
Even if you've upgraded it, I think it might only be about 9 spaces from one end to the other.
Yeah, I think it goes 5 to one side at most. So yeah, you're going to be super lucky to not fail at some point. So there is that push your luck element. You can choose after every trick to safely land, get a little bonus, upgrade your scoring, score your tricks played.
As is the way with push your luck games. If you don't fail, if you don't push your luck too hard, you'll get some sort of benefit. If you go bust, you won't.
Yeah, if you do get knocked off, the dice aren't in your favour, and you get rocked off one side or the other, you lose the last trick you played, which fair enough. You get the X Games, they're not going to score that rail grind where you've actually landed on your knees afterwards. So you've got 1 less card to score, you've got 1 less card to move around the city with as you try and unlock the skater corners or pick up the on-map bonuses like your bells and your spray cans.
It's great. It's got all of these sort of what are Tony Hawk's memories for me. It's got, the balance bar, where you're trying to stay in the middle. You've got the skater thing, which is basically horse,
It
right?
is.
You're trying to complete the set, yeah, and then all the like graffiti cans and everything is just really cool.
It's iconic, perhaps of its time. You know, it might speak to our generation, Tom, more than anyone younger or much older than us. And I'm not going to deny that.
Maybe they knew their target audience.
And I think they did really well with it. I'm a little surprised it's not more commonly known. I think the theme is that strong, but it was a Kickstarter and it did relatively well.
Mm-hmm.
It never fails to be super fun, and watching everyone around the table
has some great
stare at those dice, fingers crossed, hoping they don't eat the tarmac.
If you bail early, it's so hard to keep up.
I really love it. It was my number one last year, and I was kind of surprised it hadn't dropped even a little bit for me. But it does just sit up there as a super fun title.
Still surprises me. There are one or two things that I was expecting to see in your top 10 that aren't there.
Cool. Well, we'll hit your number one, and then.
I don't think my number one's going to really surprise anyone. My number one is Spirit Island.
Yeah.
Which has, I think, very reliably been in my top 3 pretty much since I bought it 5 or 6 years ago, something like that.
It's a great game. It's again another, unsurprising for you, Tom, heavy game.
Another heavy Euro asymmetrical factions game. Yeah. This one's a co-op game though.
It is, and I think that makes it more appealing for me personally.
Yes, it's great as a co-op game. It is heavy. And it can depend on who you're playing with, how many players you play with, and the spirits, the factions that you pick. Because there are definitely ones that are a lot more simple than others. But the co-op portion of this game that allows you to sort of work with the other players to combo together can be really, really interesting. And there's just such an absurd number of possible combinations between the different spirits.
Yeah, there's a lot of factions in there
together. I mean, they even rate the spirits on the back of each of the spirit boards. There's a bunch of ratings about what they specialize in: offense, defense, utility, support, fear, which is like a mechanism that speeds up the win condition of the game.
Aha.
There's a load of different spirits that you can play. I think I've got all of the expansions except for one of the small box expansions.
Okay.
Which I think only added 2 spirits. And I've got 20 spirits or something.
Oh wow! I was thinking there was a dozen, but 20 is incredible.
Oh yeah, there's loads.
And what's the shortest kind of encapsulating statement of what the game is? From what I remember, you are spirits of this island which are being invaded, and you're trying to effectively wipe out.
Imagine being a small, emulates a small island nation with sort of native inhabitants who are being invaded by 14th century conquistadors or settlers, right? That can be a number of different nations. There are actually sort of scenarios where you can play with them being the conquistadors, or they can be the French, or they can be the Dutch, or the British, or there's a bunch of different options. You've got the Swedish as an option as well.
Oh.
And they all play slightly differently as well. And they behave differently in their difficulty settings, but that's just a load of additional complexity to the game you don't even need to use. What you play as is a spirit of the island. So you'll have natives on the island, you'll have different terrain types on the island, but you are there as the angry spirit god of the island, you and your friends, who don't want the conquistadors to take over your island and build pavements and cities and stuff like that. So
a reasonable
you are here to smash their towns and kill all of the invaders, which, just kind of funny. And it's got great little sort of little aspects to it that you don't necessarily realise when you first pick up the game. But for example, all of the spirits and the natives are wooden pieces. All of the invaders are plastic.
Oh, that's a neat little touch.
Yeah, which you don't necessarily think about, and then you look at the board and you're like, hang on, all of these pieces are sort of natural, and all of these pieces are manufactured.
I wonder, do you know for sure if that was an active choice in the design?
Yes, it was. Yeah,
that's clever.
Yeah, so it's very clever in the way it works. It's got a load of expansions that, I mean, I won't dive into a huge amount, but there's a bunch of expansions that expand on the options and make it a little bit more, or a little bit less of a predictable game. The core game itself, once you grasp the way the programming of the AI works, it can become a bit predictable.
Yeah, because I remember, and I think I've only ever played this once with you.
It's a
It's kind of
programming
like,
puzzle,
okay,
yeah.
on their turn, they're going to move to here, and then they'll build this, and they'll expand to here.
Yeah.
So your planning is kind of mitigating what
You
you
can
know will be there.
You can see what's coming a round or two in advance.
Yeah.
To a certain degree.
Still tricky to manage though, from what I
Oh
recall.
yeah, it can still be very difficult. The game ultimately will be a crisis management, and you have to get to the point where you've built up your power enough that you can break that curve. So it's a lot of the game is trying to get ahead of the curve, get a handle on the crisis, so that you can then mercilessly smash the hell out of the invaders at the end of the game, which can be really satisfying.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember flooding people off a whole swathe of areas.
Oh
before.
yeah. There's some fantastic sort of thematic things, and there's some really cool ways that some of the spirits work. The ocean, for example, the way that the ocean behaves mimics a tide. Flow inland, you spread your presence inland, you do stuff on the coast, and then you pull back out again when you need to sort of like reset your hand. And you literally flow in and out like a tide throughout the game, which is just really, really clever.
It's beautiful design.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a bonkers amount of content there. There's loads of scenarios and different enemy nations you can play against in various different combinations, which have different ratings of difficulty. I think I've played with so many different people that I've barely ever got off the base starting level difficulty when I'm playing with other people. But I've played it a bunch solo, and it's one of the few games that I will play solo happily because I know exactly how the game works.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy playing like different spirits and seeing how different spirits function together, trying the more difficult scenarios.
See, I was going to say we'll have to have another round, but I'm not sure I'll handle anything beyond the basics.
I broke it out not long ago. I taught it to Justin and Carl, who'd never played it before.
Yeah.
And they absolutely loved it.
I bet they did.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, there we go, folks. Our top 10 of now-ish.
This is a top 10, right? Do you have any honourable mentions, things that just about maybe missed the cut, or things that we maybe have played since you did this list originally that you think would have potentially been in the top 10?
Yeah, definitely that last one.
Yeah.
I've been looking for the last couple of years probably at something in the Garfield games. I don't know even what to call it these days. It's not a trilogy because it's moved on to the 8th or 9th in the game, all within that larger area.
Yeah, it's the series.
Yeah. So we start with Raiders and Shipwrights, and whatever the third one is, of the North Sea.
Yes.
And then we had Paladins, Viscounts, and Architects of the West Kingdom.
Yeah.
And I've been looking to get one of the West Kingdom games for a while now. And then more latterly, they've got of the South Tigris, which I'm still curious because they're all quite unique in their own style.
Do some really, really cool things with worker placement.
Yeah. And it's for that reason that I think Architect of the West Kingdom, which is the one I've picked up, oh my goodness, it's a strong contender to push out Lords of Waterdeep for my favourite worker placement.
Yeah, I'd say if I'd done this maybe more recently, I think this might have scraped the top 10 as well.
Yeah, it's that good. I played it 3 times in 2 weeks, which for me is a lot. I quite often will get a game and I might get to play it once in the first month and then once again a couple of months later. I played it at least twice, I think, with you, Tom, and I think we both supremely enjoyed our experiences with this.
Yeah.
It does something wildly different to what Waterdeep does, which is this space is mine and mine alone. Architect says, well, yeah, I'll use this space, and then you can use this space, and then I'll use this space again, and because I've already here, I get to do 2 things.
It's interesting. Yeah, almost every space is open. Like a lot of worker placement games have space exclusivity, so that when you place a worker, it serves 2 functions. It's for you to take the action and for you to block someone else from taking the action.
Yeah, Everdell springs to mind. You need this thing, you're not going to have it, I'm taking it.
In Architects, almost every space is not exclusive, and the spaces get more effective the more time you take the action. So after a few rounds, there might be one space that has like 10 workers in it, as all of the players are like piling on this one action.
Yeah, it's a genius piece of design because on top of that, you have an option which, again, I've never seen in any other game, which is your workers stay on the board until you retrieve them as a special action, or you can go to the town hall and collect other people's workers as an action.
Someone else rounds up your workers and then sells them to jail.
or just holds them hostage.
Yeah.
Which is just, I couldn't quite believe that was a thing, and I thought, oh god, this is going to get complicated. But in actual fact,
Such a cool mechanic.
it flows so well, and you think, well, okay, you start with 20 workers, and I think, okay, I've used 18 of them. My next turn has to be retrieve my workers from and even then, it's not retrieve all workers; it's retrieve all workers from a certain certain color from one location.
Yeah.
So you have to pull back your own workers, or hope that they haven't, your own workers haven't been corralled by an opponent and sold to the jail, as Tom says.
So, I mean, worker placement games, the workers are always a limited resource. But in Architects, you don't feel like they're a limited resource up until you run out of them, which is after quite a long time.
Yeah.
And then you're then playing almost like a different game where you're trying to manage the flow of workers backwards and forwards from board to your space or to jail.
Yeah.
Which is it's really interesting because you can see these ways of making a certain way of generating a resource or a certain action on the board really, really tempting by just taking the action over and over and over again, up until a certain point where you've pushed your luck too far and someone else turns around and goes, oh, hang on, Simon's put 5 workers in the mine.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and arrest all of those guys.
Yeah.
Which obviously penalises you for taking the action too greedily.
Yeah, the more you take the action, the better it is for you. Up to the point you become a massive target.
Yeah, it becomes tempting for someone else and then you're a target. Yeah.
Right, Tom, we should mention other games because we need to do a whole episode on Architects of this West Kingdom. It deserves its own week.
I've got two. I've got 2 quick ones. Expeditions, which we touched on briefly in the Scythe family. I've played it a few times. It has all of the Scythe look, but not really any of the Scythe DNA, other than the sort of end game scoring race mechanism, which is very cool.
Yeah, if you played Scythe, there's a vast amount of familiarity in its setting and its
kind of totally different
theme, but not in its play style. Really.
It's more of a deck builder.
Yes.
Whereas Scythe is a tableau builder and resource management game.
Yeah, it's even more removed from the potential combat scenario. Yes. There is no fighting in Expeditions. It is about the exploration, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's great. Really, really cool. I really enjoy Expeditions. I definitely like to play it some more. The other one is Icky.
I've only played this once. I did enjoy it.
So this is one that Wayne has. Super highly rated. It's got an expansion out now.
Yeah.
But it's a game about being a shopkeeper in Japan in like the 18th century, 19th century, something like that.
Sounds such an obscure premise for a game. It really does. But the gameplay is great. That one-way action selection track.
So you have a sort of a piece that moves around the streets and takes actions depending on which shops it stops in front of, and you can you can sort of buy shops or buy different types of specialities for shops.
Yeah.
And then you place those shops in different spaces on the board. And then as you move around the board or other people move around the board, they can land in front of your shop and they get to do an action depending on the space that they land on. And then they can potentially also use your shop. So it becomes like an extra action that can be used. If you use your own shop, you don't really get any benefit other than the action that it provides you. If someone else uses your shop, then it gives your shop owner sort of experience, and they progress up a track that gives the owner more income.
Yeah.
Eventually to a point where they then retire and they come off the board, which serves 2 functions in that once they're off the board, they give you normally a different type of income, and they also free up the space on the board, which may be good or may be bad, because you might want to hold the space on the board to stop someone else from having it.
Yes.
Or you might want to clear a spot off the board because there are certain points in the game where whole districts might burn down. You have this sort of weird push your luck mechanism where there's a resource track in the game that essentially serves as an initiative tracker and protection against shops burning down, but otherwise does essentially nothing. So you sort of have to invest in it if you want to go early in initiative or if you want to protect your shops. But if you don't invest in it and always make sure that your shops are behind someone else who is investing in it, then you don't need to worry about the fire protection.
Yeah,
you can instead spend your money on other stuff.
You get the safety of the protection, or you can invest elsewhere and just hope that nothing happens.
And the chances of your shops burning down are relatively slim, but it seems to happen with alarming frequency. So, yeah, you can never really rely on not having a fire happen.
Yeah, I think it's an inevitability. It's a bit randomised as to where it hits, so you might be safe.
Yeah.
But you're kind of encouraged to spread where your shops are because there's scoring criteria based on position from what I
Yeah,
remember.
you want
So
you want
don't necessarily
matched,
want to
you
just
want
be
matched shop types, like shops of the same color in the same quadrant of the board.
Yeah.
If you have shops of the same color in the same quadrant, they will score exponentially more points
Yeah.
until those shops retire or or they burn down.
Good choice. I will mention Azul as one of, if not my first purchase of a modern board
A
game.
solid foundation.
Can't go wrong with that. And that was, little spoiler / encouragement to go and watch their video. That was Matt's number 10 of all time.
Oh, okay.
So go check out our YouTube video from Wayne and Matt to hear their current top 10.
You beat me to it. I was going to mention that they've also done one of these. I think they did it a couple of months ago.
Yes, they're a little ahead of us. We're a bit behind on our recording, but hey, we're here now. And these lists will last as long as until we next do one. So it's all good.
I'm sure there'll be a whole raft of new things following the shows this year. So there's bound to be some shake-ups.
Yeah, at the time of recording, we're a week out from UKGE, so we're hoping to see some epic titles there and perhaps get some new top 10 picks.
There's always some surprises. Thanks for listening to Board Stupid. If you like what we do, please remember to subscribe to us for updates and to get future episodes of the show from any and all good podcasting services. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram, as well as on YouTube, where you'll see a whole raft of game reviews, unboxings, various industry coverage, and you'll also obviously see Matt and Wayne have done their own top 10 recently as well. Just search for @BoardStupidUK, that's BOARD, on Google, anywhere, Facebook, Instagram, we will undoubtedly pop up. If you like our content, do us a favour, give us a review, preferably as many stars as you can, wherever you can review us, on podcasts, on videos. Share the links to our episodes on social media, tell a friend or tell all your friends, or reach out to us, talk to us. We love to hear from people. If you've got any feedback or questions, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. What do you think of our top 10s? Everyone's entitled to an opinion, of course.
I dare you to question our picks.
I don't mind if people do.
No, I don't either, but they will be wrong. No. Every game is not for everyone, so we would love to hear your top picks. If not top 10, even just the top 3 of the current time.
I'm always interested to hear reasons why people don't like the games that I rate highly.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Love that discussion.
So, have you taken the PubMe challenge and sifted through with various vast collections to try and decide which are your top picks? Do you have any new surprise entries for 2024? Or is there anything upcoming that you're sure will be in your top 10? Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again real soon.
Bye-bye, folks.